So I'm going to be real informal since I think I know almost everybody in this room. I'm just going to go ahead and I know everybody on the screen, but I'm just going to go say, Barbara and Laurel, we are so happy to have you here to talk about this, and thank you for allowing us to record it. But I think that you guys probably know your background better than I do. And I was like, well, I could sit here and read all this, but I think that, you know, considering that we don't have hundreds of people here, I don't need to make it too formal. And you guys can just tell us about yourselves and get started on your conversation. And I'm just excited to hear everything. I don't like to write, but I like to learn about stuff like this. So this is great.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks
really
a lot.
appreciate
Glad
it.
to be here. So
That's cool. Yeah.
I'll start. We're both older sisters, so we can both be bossy and we can be bossy over each other.
Yes, we can.
But I feel like I'm coming home, so that's why I want to start, and I want to introduce my friend, Barb. So I'm Laurel Smith, and I first came to Vincennes and Vincennes University in 1985. And I taught writing here, and I had poetry workshops here, and I did advising here and career counseling here, and eventually I was chair of the English department. Shout out to the English department folks right now, students and faculty, they're the best. And then I had the opportunity to go into administration. I was initially the director of the honors program, that was, as I said, chair of the English department, assistant provost for curriculum instruction, and then provost. And I had not planned to be an administrator, but interestingly, if you're an English major, I say, and you embrace reading and writing, you can do anything. I would tell my students who came into my comp class, you know, how is this related to my major? And I would just say, you know, I was an English major. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was a departmental major, which meant I didn't do student teaching right away. And my first job out of college was working for a radio station, because when I tried out for that job, I had a good radio voice and I could write copy. You can come in, and if you were a local business and all the stuff you wanted to say about your business, you were only going to pay for a 30-second blurb, and I could make that work. So I'm just saying to my students, you can do anything with an English major. So, and Barbara's an English major too, but she is based in Indianapolis, and she is director of the former director of the Indiana Writers Center, and I will let her tell more about it.
All right. Actually, weirdly, I was an elementary school major, and then I did my student teaching and realized that there was a lot of shoe tying and stuff like that. So I sort of fell in love with high school, and I ended up having this weird job. We just call it the alternative program, and this was in the 70s, around 74, 75-ish. And it was a community learning thing. And so the kids would have contracts, and part of what they did always had to have some kind of community. And I started out as the van driver and sort of worked my way into an actual job. And I did that. And I started writing when I was there. I had always wanted to write, and I've always loved to read. But I just, I didn't really have the courage to do it. And at one point, some kid said to me, did you always want to be a teacher? And I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to have to answer this question. And I said, well, I love to teach, blah, 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 blah. But he said, was that what you always wanted to do? And I sort of in a small voice said, well, once I wanted to be a writer. And he just looked at me and he said, why aren't you? Which is why I love high school kids, right? Why aren't you? And I could not answer that question in any kind of way that was satisfying to me as a teacher who expected her students to do, all of your dreams. That's what we always say. So I sort of gritted my teeth and I started writing. I was very fortunate. I had no training in writing at all. But I sold a first novel really easily. And I thought, oh, cool. This is going to be great. And then I went 10 years, maybe 12 between, it was 12 actually, between the first and second. And so that was interesting because I was teaching and I loved teaching, and I was always, it's all about the process and whatever. And there would be so many times when I just wanted to give up, and I would think, well, if you give up, then what are you going to say to those kids, right? And I really think that was the thing that kept me going in a lot of ways. So eventually then, over a period of time, I've published 8 novels. I have several sitting at home looking for a home. It's like having children that aren't launching, you know, what do you worry about them? And so some of my novels are young adult novels and some of them are adult novels. And I did a book that's called Novel Ideas. So if you're interested in writing a novel, this is a terrific book because, and I say that not because I'm such a great writer, but the interviews that we did with novelists are fascinating because we didn't want where were you born, stuff like that. We really wanted to get people talking about their process. And so I basically read everything that any given person had written. And then I could sort of see these patterns in their work and talk about their material and how it, took a different form from one book to another. And then to talk about one book in, kind of in detail. Where did it come from? How did it evolve? What surprised you? What were the revisions? And so it's a great book to read if you're interested in writing a novel, or just if you're interested in knowing where novels come from, because what you come to the end of it and what you know is it's really hard, and that is something that a lot of people will say, I've got a book in me, and I just sort of want to say, I think I might have a neurosurgery in me. I could just maybe do it on you. Would that be good? It's not that easy, but it's also possible, right? I mean, if you are willing to take the time and really learn about craft and, let go of your ego so that you can take the feedback and what have you. So anyway, I've had this sort of wacky career, and I taught at Broadville High School for almost, 20-ish years in the humanities and performing arts. And so I had these sort of independent study students, and that was wonderful because it was like a little writing lab, and I just learned so much when I was teaching them. And then in addition to that, I accidentally became the director of the Writers Center when it was about to go under, and I found myself at lunch saying, well, I guess I could do that on a volunteer basis for a while. And then I thought, who actually just said that? And I did it for 10 years. And I wasn't an administrator, but right.
Yeah.
It's common sense. So I did that. That was interesting. And now I'm the writer in residence. And, so I just do things all over the place. And I've never had a plan, which on some days I think that was just a great way. And then some days I think, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you have a plan? But as a friend of mine's father said, when they were arguing I believe they were arguing about the civil rights, and she was from Mississippi, and he was a good guy, but he was an old guy, and he said, I walked in all the light I knew. And I just think that's the most amazing thing. Every time I say it, I get that cold feeling. And what else can you do, right? You walk in all the light you know. And you come to a place and you look back and you think, oh, I didn't see that part, but that wasn't lit for me then. So anyway, that's where I am. And at the moment, I find myself really frustrated by the whole world of publishing because I'm sort of at a certain age now where I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna be that young, promising writer, and that's a lot of what they look for. Nor can I even be the debut novelist who's a marvel because she's 76, right? I'm somewhere in the middle. So it's interesting. I just started a Substack. It's called Book Pilgrim, which you might be interested in checking out. But so I just decided I love Book Pilgrim. Oh, thank you. I love it too. And I'm just writing about books that I love, kind of in the context of my own life. And finding that it's so pleasurable, because novels, even under the best of circumstances, take forever. But these little pieces, they're like little essays, sort of, I guess, short, 1,000 words or something. I just enjoy writing them, and I enjoy the response. People actually read them as opposed to the novels in the drawer, right? So that's been something really nice that I have been doing since the summertime, trying to do it maybe once a week. So that's me.
Okay. So why are we here today, and how did we get here? Well, about a year ago, a little farther along than that, I was asked, as happens sometimes, people know I like to write. People know I write poetry, and if you think it's hard to get a novel published, getting a poetry published, quite a challenge.
Yeah.
So, but getting poems published is not as hard. And finding venues to share poetry with audiences, that's not as hard either. And I've always liked taking poetry and sharing it to groups, not just my poetry, but any poetry. My mother was a first grade teacher, and even before I was into teaching, she would say, you know, I'm going to do this at school today. Do you want to come? And first graders are not afraid to show you they appreciate poetry, as opposed to sometimes in high school, even if they like a poem, they don't want to show you that they like a poem. But first graders, you could go in and you can just any kind of rhyme. You know, you take a Gwendolyn Brooks. You know, I touch petals of a rose, a silky feeling through me goes. I mean, they love it. You know, and you don't have to tell them that's a couplet. You don't have to teach them anything. It's an interesting sound. It's an interesting image. I touch the petals of a rose, and then a silky feeling through me goes. Whoa! It's what oft was thought, but never so well expressed. And you don't have to teach them where that came from either. They just that's just an interesting way of thinking about things. So you've got sound, you've got image, and you've actually got a little bit of a story. A silky feeling through me goes. Well, what was that like? You know, if you're in broadcasting or you're doing interviewing, then you can take that wherever you want. And those are three very powerful things: sound, image, and story. And so our friend, Joyce Brinkman, who is just an interesting character. If you've never met Joyce Brinkman, she is probably Indiana's best cheerleader for poetry. That's hands down. She is a force of nature. So Joyce said, I've got a project going, I've got another grant going, and here's what it is. And you never know what it's going to be. And this just pushed everything for me. She goes, it's poetry, yes. And it's collaborative, yes. And then she said, and it's dealing with careers. And it's like, it's my advising piece. No one ever asked me to bring my advising piece to poetry. It's like, yes. Okay, so, and this is what the final draft looks like, okay? What I see, I can be. And there's the images, and there's an interesting statement, and there isn't anybody else's name. There's not any authors. There's a whole bunch of information on the back about where this is coming from and who the collaborative authors are. And it is illustrated, et cetera, et cetera. And my job, my assignment was, if I wanted to do this, could I think of a career I would like to focus on, and could I write a poem about it? And it was aimed for third graders in Indiana public schools. So the grant, and although, because Joyce is based in Indianapolis, and that's a large concentration of our population, it's already gone out to those schools, those students. But she also wanted to have the poets represent other parts of the state, and she also wanted to find a way to get the book to other parts of the state. You know, and she's not as connected in all the state areas like she is in Indianapolis. So what career am I going to choose? Because I've been talking to students, advising students in just about every career you can think of, and the career I chose was librarian. So I'm very happy today to speak to some of my favorite librarians are in the audience. And Joyce said, and don't just tell about what it's like to be in the library. You have to include what it takes to study to be that librarian. There's that research, you know, what's the background for this particular career? And I said, okay. And I said, do I have to rhyme? Which I love rhyme, and I do have poetry that rhymes. But what I was seeing, and if I was going to have to talk about affiliated with the ALA and does that rhyme with, you know, what, and how that was going to work out, and could I bring in off rhymes, etc. And she said, there will be rhymers and non-rhymers, because that's the other piece of this puzzle. If you read Joyce's introduction to this book, she's saying it's it was a letter to parents when she initially wrote it. If you read this to your child, they may like rhyme, they may not like rhyme. They may like one of these careers, they may not like the career. The point is, you know, they have options too here. And this is I started calling it a coffee table book, but given that it's going to third graders, I think it's a cookie table book.
There you go.
And you can look at it and you can look at these things and say, well, you know what? Being a fireman's not in that book. And it's like, you know what? You get to write the sequel because good stories have sequels. And how do I know that? Harry Potter. It's not only a good story the first time you read, all the sequels are good, all the movies good. You know what else is good? The Legos. Because then you are making your own world and making your own stories in this whole world of wizardry. And so this book, this cookie table book is starting that out. So there are different careers mentioned, there are different, and some of the poems are real light and funny. I've already told you that mine doesn't rhyme, but I was thinking of, and I tried to set it up like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where every person had a story to tell. So I focused on the story the librarian had to tell, and that was a real joy to me to be immersed in that. And I alluded to different kinds of libraries, but I'm especially interested in public libraries and higher ed libraries and public institutions, how we try to reach everybody. And even in my bio at the end of this book, everybody got a little bio. I'll tell you flat out. I mean, I fell in love with libraries when I was very, very young in Muncie, Indiana. And when I had my own library card, I don't getting my driver's license. Okay, that felt better. But my first credit card didn't feel as good as my first library card, because I could go by myself and check out what I wanted and pick out what I wanted.
Yeah.
Oh, it was great. It was great.
Oh my gosh.
So this is a celebration of reading and writing. And Joyce, when the initial grant and the initial funding to fund the give poets a little bit of seed money and put this all together through Brick Street Poetry Incorporated, they do lots of programs throughout the state, especially in Indianapolis. But Brick Street is working on a project that will reach all the way to Vincennes. She's working with Sarah Wolf, and Matt Groen's here. He's one of the poets. We're going to be putting banners related to the solar eclipse on Main Street with haikus from 8 different poets in Indiana. And so we're happy one of those poets is sitting here.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations.
So that's Joyce. Joyce is the master, but you have to be ready. You have to be a good enough poet that, like, I'm going to need this. I'm sorry. I'm going to need this in 4 weeks, you know, and because the grant has its deadline thing, and you got to go with the flow, Joyce. And so this was one of those projects, and this is how it happened. And then we got, I'm rattling. The book is here. I get my copy of the book, and in April or May, when did you all have Humanities on the Green? The end of April.
Usually do it there.
Okay, so back when I was still on the faculty here, we just had poetry on the green. Well, we're collaborating even more. We don't just have poetry on the green where students come and read a poem, their own or a favorite or whatever, students, faculty, community members. We had people from the music department playing music. We had potters. We had artwork part of the green too. We had this wonderful day of everything out on the green. And it just so happened that was the day my copy of the book came to me in Vincennes, because I'm not a 3rd grade teacher, so I wasn't one of the first people to get this book hot off the press in January. I got mine in April. And I had this book with me, and Charlotte said, would you do a book talk on this book? And it's like, I will, but you need to know this was a collaborative venture. And this was, and I'm happy to talk about poetry and open it up for questions later on and my own publishing experience. But I said, if you also want to talk about publishing, not every book gets a grant. There are other ways publishing happens. And to talk about publishing, small scale, big scale, I said, you really need someone with more writing experience. And yes, this is geared toward young audiences, but Barb has actually written young adult fiction. So I wanted to have someone join me who could talk about not just the collaborative grant projects, but other projects, and so happily Barb said yes, and here she is. She's visited Vincent's before. She's been to the public library in the past with ALF, so we're glad you're back in Vincent's. And if you would talk a little bit about doing a young adult novel and the path that takes and that state of that, because I think for students who are writing or thinking they're a children's book author, I know Matt teaches creative writing, I think that would be interesting.
Oh, sure. First of all, I will say that the book that my first young adult novel, which is called Wish You Were Here, I didn't know that it was a young adult novel. That was around 1994, it was published. It was about the time that what we think of now kind of as YA books that are sort of more honest books about the lives of teenagers, was just kind of coming into being. And John Green's Looking for Alaska had been published maybe a year or two before that. And so that was a big book. And so when my agent said I could sell it in YA, I was not sure how I felt about that. Because there's a lot of weirdness with writers, oh, you're only a child. Do you think you'll ever grow up and write a book for adults? There's really that weird feeling about it. And it certainly wasn't taught in any MFA program. I don't have an MFA, but it was kind of looked down upon, even though many of those books are absolutely wonderful. So in any case, I sort of reluctantly said, yeah, remember this had been 12 years since the first one. And it turned out to be a good decision because the book got more attention as a young adult book in that period of time than it would have gotten as an adult book. And so it was on the ALA Best Book for Young Adults, Best Books for Young Adults list, and a whole bunch of other ones. I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but it got a good reception. I got really good reviews in the Star Review and PW and all that. But here's the weirdness about publishing. That it was published by Hyperion. My earlier book was Harper and Row. That's how old it was. That was 1982. And this was Hyperion, which was a brand new company. And I sort of thought, wow, that could be a really good thing for me. But it turned out that it really wasn't a good thing for me because they didn't really know what they were doing. And they hadn't really made a real commitment to young adult then. That book never went into paperback for whatever reason, which was insane, because I think it would have sold as a paperback book. So anyway, that was kind of where that whole thing started. And then I had a second one that came out in 1997, also by Hyperion, that was called Stranded in Harmony. And that was a book that I had written originally. That took me like 15 years to write or something. It was horrible. It started out as an adult book, multiple points of view, and it just didn't work. And so I started thinking, who's the character with the most at stake? And it was the person, it was a teenager in the book. So when they said to me, do you have another book? I thought, okay, I'm going to take a shot at that book and see if that'll work that way. And so that was published by them as well. Never went into paperback. So it was a very, really frustrating experience. And then, you get this kind of, if you're with those kind of big five or traditional ones, there's a lot of turnover in those companies. And my editor went someplace else. And so then the book was in somebody else's hands who hadn't bought it. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes on that you just have to learn to deal with as a writer if you want to write, if you want to do that level of publishing. I did another novel, which was a historical novel published by a very small press called Vermeer's Daughter, which I didn't really think of as a YA novel either, but we were trying to get in on the market of the Vermeer phase. So this could be the first Vermeer book for young people, right? It got good reviews, but it didn't go anywhere either. And then I published another, Flux, which is a medium-sized company out of Minnesota, a book that's called Everything You Want, a YA, which is about a family that won the $50 million in the lottery and just all got out of whack from the point of one of the daughters. But nothing, it was like nothing really ever happened. The sales were not that great. And then the last YA, which I really love, is called Looking for Jack Kerouac. And this is funny to me. It got a starred review. It was a very, very small press out of Indianapolis, actually. And it got a starred review in Publishers Weekly. And it started out like something like in this historical novel, it was set in 1964, and I thought, oh my God, I am so old that I'm writing about my own era and it is now considered to be historical fiction. Go figure, right? So, that's kind of where I am with my YA books. I have right now a YA book that's out there and has gotten through two rounds at a very small Chicago publisher. So, got my fingers crossed about that one. But I have learned not to count on anything. I don't take it personally anymore. I don't count on anything because it's kind of awful when you do. And more often than not, it doesn't pan out. And I don't mean to be negative about it, but I do feel that if you want to be a writer, whether you want to be a children's book writer or YA or whatever, you have to be realistic about what you want and what is possible. And there were several moments in my writing career, because my first novel got really great reviews too, but nothing happened. And so there were moments when something might have caught, but it didn't. And so you just have to learn to live with that. And so, like I said, figuring out what you want and what's possible. Well, we would all like to have a bestseller, because when we all like to be rich and famous, it might be annoying, but I think we all probably feel we could deal with that. So I figured after a while that probably was not going to happen to me. So when I talk to people about writing, I say, one, if you are satisfied being a writer for yourself because you love it, no matter what it is that you're writing, lucky you, because writing is wonderful. And if you can be happy doing that, more power to you. It's not a moral issue to get out there and try to publish it. If you, and then you don't have to worry about craft or editing, you can write whatever you want and you read it and it seems fine to you, cool. If you want to write for your family and friends and a really small audience, then you have to think about craft more than you did before, because you have to make it so that other people actually know what you're talking about, which they don't always if in that first draft. And the greater audience you want, the more you have to learn about craft, the more you have to learn to take feedback, the more you have to be willing to work with an editor who might be willing to buy your book if you do this, this, and this. And whether you agree with that or not, you have to decide what you think about that and what you're willing to do. 9 times out of 10, editors are right. And you're probably wise to do, they won't say do this in particular, but they'll tell you something that's wrong. And then if it's a good editor, they'll tell you in a way that you go, duh, and then you figure out a way to figure it out yourself. So you have to learn to separate writing from publishing, your life as a writer, as and your life as an author, which is a word I don't really even like. I don't use it when I talk about myself. I always say I'm a writer, because it means something else, and it's a puffed up kind of word to me, especially if you use it about yourself. So that's my, the trail. And it's funny stuff, because I asked John Green, whom I know a little bit, not very well, and I know he gets, inundated with stuff. I asked him if he would read my novel, Looking for Jack Kerouac, and he said, I don't blur, which is not actually true. He does blur, not very often, but he does blur sometimes. And, that would have made a huge difference for that book, because that was 2014. And I think he might have felt bad about it, because later he said something, he was quoted as saying something about me that I could have, it wasn't about a specific book, but I could have used it, right, as a blurb. And I will use it in the future if I have the opportunity to. So, you got to get the book in the hands of the right people, and your publishers have to be cooperative, and they have to get the book, to reviewers. It's that part of it to me is a nightmare. I don't like it. I don't do it very well. I know about it, so I can answer questions about it, but it is the absolute opposite of what you have to do to be a writer.
And what's interesting, you also can't be a writer if you're not a reader. And I think it's interesting that Barb was talking about what she's doing online now, her book Pilgrim, because I think more people are going to know about that. that may be one way, you don't even know you're promoting yourself.
No, I know.
who you are.
I have thought about
Because
that.
you find, if you have to put yourself out there, then you're gonna think, okay, how would I be comfortable putting myself out
Mhm.
there? And so when she's talking about the book she loves, in Book Pilgrim, her writing self is there too, because you read what she said this week on Book Pilgrim. And if that's your first introduction to Book Pilgrim, then you'll say, well, who is this? And then, so you find that out. So there's the traditional path that you've
Right.
traveled for that publishing thing, but then you've got to get creative about that too. How will people know about what else do I want to be as a writer? So I told you earlier that what I liked about poetry was taking it and sharing it. I like a live audience. That's a big deal. Happily, one of the last readings Gwendolyn Brooks gave was here at Vincennes University, and it was like the month. She came in February, and I had to defend my dissertation, which included Gwendolyn Brooks, in May. And so for 2 days, I got to drive her around and talk to her, and she packed the auditorium. And at that time, the president of Vincennes University was Philip Summers. His background was not humanities, and he came into the audience and sat there and goes, "My goodness, there are a lot of people here." It's like, it's
Duh.
Gwendolyn Brooks. But again, it's depending on what world you're in.
Yeah.
But and her books are great, but if you don't think in her 80s she could have you eating out of her hand as an oral poetry, and I still go back to that, why I love teaching it. Poetry, and one reason it rhymed was it's an oral art. You had to remember it to say it, or the story would die. So when they talked about epic and lyric poems, it wasn't that people wanted to go out, let's see if I can write a really long poem, Ulysses, for example, or
To torture people in
Beowulf.
the 21st
To read it
century.
later. They had to get a rhyme in and a rhythm in so that people would remember this story. Now, our big stories are novels or films, but the elements that were in that epic, what's memorable, the lines that stand out, those still echo, those are still powerful, and those stories are there. So in getting this grant for this book, Joyce knew it wasn't just about trying to get the books out. If you go to Poetry Foundation,
Is that where she got the grant?
she got a second grant. She got one from Indiana,
Oh.
then she got Poetry Foundation. And if you go, that's a major, if you're in poetry, that's a major. You're at Poetry Foundation. This is one of the grantee partners that they are celebrating, and it shows how Brick Street takes poetry like this to kids, to that art park on the north side of Indianapolis. And so when Charla asked me if I was going to talk about this book, yes, and I was going to have my friend Barb come, yes. And then how are we going to get this to third graders here? So partnerships are key. So I reached out to Ann Herman and Lisa Miller in the education department here at BU, because Lisa has a wonderful project of reading through the park at Kimmel Park. If you don't know about that project, it's coming back this year in the spring, even bigger. And they had 100 people last year, first time. They're expecting 200, and they're very likely to have Lilly funding to keep it going in the future. The community foundation that Knox County is founded here. But pay attention to that, walking through the park to read a book with your kids. That's wonderful. So they have connections in the public schools that I do not have. I know some young kids, I know a few teachers, but they could reach out with their connections, and we found a way to have the counselors said, oh yeah, we do a career unit around that time, that'd be great to have the book. So we got enough copies, thanks to the Poetry Foundation part of the grant, so that every third grader in the Vincennes Community Schools will get a copy of this book. So all of those pieces had to come together, and poetry is personal. I have a place I go to write, and when I'm in that writing place, it's wonderful. But poetry is also this audience thing for me too, and I loved it when I was teaching. And you can take poetry even into Comp 1. I mean, how many times did good old Langston Hughes save the day? We were talking about concrete language or taking the time to look up a word, you know, what happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Does it fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat or crust with sugar over, syrup, sweet? Or maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? If you don't think Comp 1 students will wake up just in those short lines, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Because what happens if I have to put my dream on hold? What does it mean to be deferred? Which one of those images, festering or exploding or feeling like a heavy load, would that be for me? Tell me about that. And then, you know, then talk about how you dealt with a challenge and overcome it in a traditional kind of essay piece. You know? And you have to be creative if you're teaching Comp 1 because you got a lot of grading to do, and that's important.
Yeah.
So
Well, when I used to go into people's classrooms when I had the writer in residence job at the high school, and one thing I did every year, they taught in critical thinking. They had a Holocaust unit, and so I found these. I probably couldn't do it now because people would think it was. I mean, it is triggering, but really, I mean, is an education triggering if you're doing it right. But anyway, I got these pictures and they were, you know, and I put them on the screen, and there was one, you know, where all these people were rushing, and you could see how fast they were going because their coats were going back and kind of dragging kids along. And I, you know, some of them were, they were fairly graphic. And then they would have to write a poem that told that story, that, you know, that you weren't going to say, because you asked them to write about the Holocaust, and then they just write how horrible it was. Well, yeah, it was horrible, but what does that actually mean? And so when you look at this photograph and you see these families rushing and along the side, you know, all these awful looking soldiers with their bayonet things and their jack boots, and yeah, that's what it means. And so they wrote amazing stuff. And I think they had a better understanding of what that was, what that meant. So, you know, using poetry, whether you're triggering it with poetry or you're using something else to trigger poetry, it makes the world more real.
yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Because it's language with a feeling. And I would tell my students, you know, when you get married, no one's going to stand up there and give a statistical report about why a long marriage would be healthy. Someone's going to get up there and read a poem that means everything to you, or you're going to write your own vows, and that's a kind of poem. You know, it's people knew I was a cheerleader for poetry. That's just reality.
Well, it's important. It's an important thing to be in the world. And I think, I don't remember Kurt Vonnegut's exact quote, but it essentially he was saying, you know, creativity makes you happy. And if you were to do one creative thing every day, the world would be a better place. It takes you to a place, and it changes, I mean, it literally changes the composition of stuff in your body. If your body changes. And it is such a healthy thing to do. And you know, separating, I think when you have students, like when you're teaching a creative writing class, and some of those kids may just be in there because, well, let's do creative writing, but some of them probably secretly or not have an ambition, a drive, or whatever, to be a writer. And how can you help them in those early stages? You know, you want to encourage them, of course, but you also have to, you have to do that hard thing of saying, you have to learn craft. It isn't, you know, people say, well, I don't have any imagination. And I say, everybody does, because the only thing your imagination is your ability to ask what if. That's all it is, right? What if this, what if that, what if something else? But then once you get all that stuff down, you have to make it palatable for somebody else. And so I don't know, it's a hard thing, I think, to strike that balance. But I think if they know early on, if someone, you know, can tell them in a helpful kind of way about the difference between your life as a writer and your life as, you know, in the world of editing, publishing, and all that kind of stuff, the odds of being able to make a living as a writer are virtually none. for fiction writers or poets. My daughter makes a good living as a freelance writer, but she's writing what other people want, and she loves it. But if you want to do the other thing, well, it's really hard. I'll say to kids, there's no ladder to climb. There's no ladder. If you want to be some other kind of thing, there's a ladder. And given how smart you are and how, willing you are and personable, you can sort of predict where you're going to get in a career. But as a fiction writer, no. As a poet, no. Some of the best writers I know, nobody's heard of, and probably never will. And then we have James Patterson, right? The worst writer. You could not almost be a worse writer, yet he's making $1 gazillion. Go figure. You have to learn to live with that, and that's really hard.
Recently in the news, there's been a lot about, we lost Louise Glück, the new Nobel poet. And if you have not read Louise Glück, read. I love the wild, what is it, the virtuous night, the calm, I love that. Yeah. Anyway, but the wild iris, any of them, they're very accessible. But she thought she knew she wanted to be a poet, and she didn't want to be a poet who taught. She was afraid that would dilute it somehow. And she was surprised to find, she did a poetry workshop, and then she was surprised to find how that conversations about poetry actually helped her. It was good for her. And so being a teacher, and that was, Barb was talking earlier about, a young adult YA author could be lesser or something like that. Oh, you teach and you write, but teaching and conversations about it can nourish. You just have to be creative about, okay, I will teach and teach and teach, but then I will not spend so much time investing in my students' writing that I don't have time for me. You've got to find that balance. I brought a lot of poetry in, but I never taught creative writing per se as a whole class. I've done workshops. In my mind, I was superstitious maybe. I just didn't want to do grading. It's creative writing, and that was, I didn't think, I thought that would somehow, then I'd start wanting to grade me, and so that was my superstition. I could workshop, I could give you feedback, I could bring poetry in, and we can do all kinds of things otherwise, but I did not want to be assigned creative writing or the poet. And maybe in a different universe, I would have found a way to get around that, but I was always going to write, just like I was always going to read. And so I think we'll stop there, the value of reading and writing, because we promised Shyla that however long we talk, we'd stop in time to open to questions. And as you see, we could keep going. We could keep you here. So,
I will ask one thing. I'll ask a question. Is anybody interested in, this kind of where we are in publishing now, the variety of kinds of ways people are publishing, and what any given one of those might be? Do you want me to just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I don't know a whole lot about poetry, but I think it can fall into some of these categories. There are at the top the kind of publishing companies that are the pearls or whatever, and they're called the big five because they've been whittled down so much that there are these, I don't even know what they are anymore. I don't, Random House, whatever. And so if you want to publish in that market, and that market, you have to think it's not only poetry, fiction, and nonfiction, it's all kinds of stuff. I mean, all levels of writing, all kinds of stuff. So you have to have something that they think is gonna appeal to a mass market. Either that, or you have to be, like, in their minds, such a genius that they will be, proud to have been the publishing company to publish you. If you want to publish at that level, you have to have an agent. They won't even look at stuff if it doesn't come from an agent. And so then you have to do this thing where you have to find an agent, which can really wreck your soul. And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of concentration. You have to learn how to write a query letter and all this kind of stuff, which is, it's all very difficult, but it's all a crapshoot also. You know, if you hit the person at the right time, if you're a good writer, maybe it'll happen. And if you hit them at the wrong time, it won't happen. So, you know, there are a lot of hoops to jump through to get, you know, to that level of publishing. And right now, from what I understand from a lot of different sources, the marketing department has about as much has about as much to do with what gets published as editors. Like if you are the editor and you fall in love with the book, and what you have to do now, it's not like it used to be where you think, I'm going to invest in this writer, I think she's going to get better and better. It's like you have to fall in love with the book because you don't get that many fiction books as an editor, fiction novels or whatever. So you fall in love with the book. And so they have this, you know, this day every, you know, when they're doing for the next season or whatever, and you have to literally pitch your book to the marketing people. And then the marketing people have, you know, I mean, they have a lot of say in whether or not they feel like they can sell that book, you know, market, and whether they want to. And then even after a book is published, I mean, after the, you know, before it comes out, but after it's been accepted and all that, there's another kind of marketing thing like that, where now you've got the book in hand and you have to, you know, you have to try to get them on your side so that if they have all these books, they're going to pay special attention to yours. So that's, you know, that's the high level, for better or worse. And then there are independent presses, some of them larger, some of them smaller, some of them are academic presses. My novel, An American Tune, was published by Indiana University Press, and guess what the royalties are? 5%. Can you, I mean, that's insane, but I was glad to have it published. So there, you know, there's this whole world of those. A lot of those, not all, some of those, you have to have an agent to submit as well now, the, you know, the more prestigious ones. But a lot of those you can submit your work without an agent. So there's, you know, so there's that. And then there is something now that that is called hybrid publishing. And hybrid publishing, there's one interesting and you know, respected hybrid publisher, which is called She Writes. She Writes, you pay for them to publish the book. But they have a platform, right? And so I know a person who did this, and it was a pretty good experience for her. She's a good marketer too. But anyway, so you publish with them, and they have like a cohort of every season. So there might be 6 or 8 novels or whatever coming, and they're not only novels, they're all kinds of books. And those people are cross-promoting each other. And She Writes is also promoting them. And generally speaking, they have a community of writers that helps everybody else with marketing. So yeah, it's like a co-op, only it's really expensive, you know, to get in. I heard a woman talk and realized at some point she spent $20,000 to have her book published, which is a lot of money. And a lot of people expect that they're going to get that back, but almost nobody does. The benefit of hybrid is that while you invest in your own book essentially, and so the royalties that you get are way better. You know, you're getting probably 60% of whatever the sales are. So, you know, if you're a good salesperson and you do a lot of events, I think my friend sold a fair number of books and got her money back. But at the same time, it's an investment, you know, and you think, don't people retire and they've always wanted to write a book and they're going to invest their retirement savings in something like that? It's not a good investment. And there are also a lot of scams. And so you have to be very, very careful if you want to do it that way. And then, you know, you've got the self-publishing thing, which used to be called vanity publishing. And on a certain level, it still is. You decide, you know, whether you've tried to publish your book and you haven't been successful, or whether you don't even start, you just decide you're going to publish it yourself, which a lot of people do. You can do it that way. And there are a lot of scams there as well. That Authors Guild, I don't even know they're still around, but oh my gosh, I mean, they would charge you so much money and you didn't get that much back, and you have to buy books. The great thing now in publishing is that you can do print on demand. So if, you know, you can go through these things, you don't have to have all these books in your basement that you spent thousands of dollars on it. What the heck are you going to do with them? So, you know, those are kind of the levels. And when you're working with with students, there's a young woman in Indianapolis that I like, and I sort of follow her a little bit on Instagram. And I think, you know, she has published and talks about being a published writer a lot, a collection of poems that are not good. I mean, they're just not good. And so it can be detrimental to you as a young writer or any age writer if, you know, if you decide to go ahead and publish something, then that's your first book of poetry. And after you get more, you know, you might get better, you might get more serious, you might think that you've done that. So there are lots of things you have to be careful about. And I think young people, students, yeah.
I just have a question. I mean to interrupt your thought.
No, interrupt me.
So do these hybrid independent press, those even the big five, do they pay attention to self-publishing, like which
Yeah.
books are selling and
Yeah.
or anything like
Very,
that?
very rarely.
Okay.
The only time you might think that you could get a deal that way would be if you're like a niche person, a self-help book that you know, something like that, and they pick up on the fact that you're selling a whole bunch, then they might. But no, they don't. That's mythology. Yeah. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Are you gonna talk about the online self-publishing also? Because that's a whole different.
It is a whole different thing, and I'm
thinking like, if you go on like Amazon, there's about thousands of books that you can get on Kindle for like 99 cents.
Yeah, they're
And
ebooks.
they're, yeah, ebooks.
Yeah.
They're typically self-published, and Amazon keeps like 3 cents, and you get like 50 cents, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
the rest of my
Yeah,
stuff,
there are all these ways that you can self-publish, and Amazon is, you know, is apparently a pretty easy thing to do, and it doesn't cost you very much, so it's not the worst thing if you're gonna do something like that. The people that really get, you know, get ripped off is there are all these companies out there that are gonna help you, you know, help you publish your book, and it ends up costing you a lot of money. But no, I mean, if you want to publish online on Amazon, and that's what you want to do, but again, you know, you have to think about those levels of what you want from your writing. You know, do you want to be considered eventually by these traditional publishers? Then you got to think a little bit about what you put out there, and everybody's in a big hurry to publish.
And the benefit of not doing something like Amazon, like that you don't have that same benefit of an editor or
No, you
anything
don't.
like that.
Yeah,
It's
and a
just
lot of the-
straight,
that's
you're doing it and then you get what you get,
Yeah.
which may be greater.
It's not probably gonna be great. And so if you're gonna do self-publishing, the really good way to do it is to find somebody who can format and design your book and actually hire it maybe a developmental editor even, because most books need that, especially novels, but for sure a copy editor, so that whatever you're putting out there, yeah.
Also, not only just an editor, but a good book designer, book
Yes,
editor.
yes.
Yes, because that will make everything, that will make the difference.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, because I mean, I know you probably, I look at books and I think that's self-published, they don't look professional. And but you can hire somebody to create a cover for you that does look professional. And I will say this, you know, She Writes, they do beautiful covers. Their books are really nice. They look fine, and they are being reviewed. That's considered to be a legitimate thing, which is also funny because years ago they wouldn't review anything except what was coming out of, you know, the traditional stuff. There's another one that just started that I'm curious about, and it's 3 women who had really good jobs in publishing, and they're older, and they've started this one, it's Sibylline Press, I think it's called, and it's for women over 50. And it's a hybrid also. And so I guess, you know, the hybrids, and they're promoting the heck out of their books, which is good. And one of the things, if you're looking at those places, you know, you go to their website, and are they promoting the books they're publishing, or are they promoting the services they're offering to you to publish your book? And that's, you know, the balance of that. It tells you a lot, yeah. So, yeah.
On the opposite end of self-publishing, so you talked about like the big 5. One of the questions that kind of came to my mind when you were discussing, well, you have to have an agent, and can you kind of, you talked about a letter that you had to write, and I'm just kind of curious as to, the amount of effort versus attention versus actually getting to that point where you're having to say, here's my book and I need you to buy into this so I can be the
Yeah.
next Stephen King or whoever. So, but you know, what kind of, a little bit more detailed in that.
Like what a query letter is.
What a query letter is, what happens once the agent gets it, what they do in order to get the attention of the publisher. Because that's a huge component for, I think, some of the young aspiring
Yeah,
writers.
it
That
is.
they just get, because I talked to that day that I introduced Laurel to, that he's a bit overwhelmed by.
Oh, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, like they
It's
don't have a
horrible.
clue where to start. You should write a book about how to get published.
Oh, there actually is. There
I'm
is
sure there is. I haven't
You should
looked.
get it for the library. It's by Courtney Maum, M-A-U-M, and also Jane Friedman, who's an Indiana person, brilliant about publishing, and she has a book too, and they're very valuable. So one thing that Midwest Writers Workshop, for example, every year does what they call an agent fest, and they bring in agents, and you have an opportunity to pitch your book, and you know, you pay for the opportunity to do that, which is weird. Pardon?
How much?
The conference might be around $300, and it's got a lot of other stuff, but then you pay maybe $50 or $100 per agent
Okay.
to do the pitch, which is like 5 minutes.
Right.
10 minutes tops. To me, that is just, all I want to do is like this. Every time it comes up, I cannot do that. But so there is a possibility, you know, that you can make a contact. The trouble is, inexperienced people will do that, and if the agent shows any interest, they come away with this idea that they have an agent, but they don't. And a lot of the time, they'll say, you know, send me whatever, not the whole thing, but send me, and they don't get a response. And so it's just this, it's a business, and it is not, I don't know, I don't like it very much, but it is a way that you can have access to agents more quickly than the letter. So anyway, so there are a gazillion agents. There are things like Query Tracker is one online thing where you can find out, you know, who's looking for what. It lists agents, there's manuscript wish list. If you start Googling just literary agents, a lot of stuff will come up, and you can start reading about, you would never ever pay an agent to read your work, never. If an agent wants to look at your work and they say, I will read your work for $300, $200, $50, no, they are not legitimate. The only way they make money is by choosing a marketable book, and then they, you know, they get their percent. And so that's an integrity thing. You don't ever want to do that. And so then you just have to start researching agents and figure out which agents are, you know, kind of, you can find a list of what they've published, and are they public, or what they represent, and are they representing anything that seems like they might like yours too, which is, I mean, it's just so, it's very time consuming. So, you know, I mean, I just do a spreadsheet, and I, you know, accepted, rejected, little color coding, you know, and so that's what you have to do. And then you write the query letter, and the query letter should only be a page, no more than a page. And you know, you have to think about this agent sitting there with 8 million emails that have these queries, right? And how are you going to get that person's attention? You know, they don't want a long letter from you. They don't want it to be cute. They don't want anything. They don't want you to say, I've got the next bestseller, because probably you don't. And it also shows that you're not very professional. So basically you have to figure out, like you were talking about, being able to squish everything down into something that could be done in 30 seconds. You have to figure out how to present. It's not really exactly a synopsis, a bite, you know, something that's gonna intrigue them. And it's funny because I actually hired this person's business as query doula, which I think is hilarious. But anyway, and she was very good, and she gave me good advice. But this query letter we were talking about, this novel has kind of a ghost in it, and it has multiple points of view. And so I said, well, okay, the points of view, and there's a ghost, and she goes, don't put the ghost in there. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting, because it's as much about what you don't put in, because the person's going to look at that and go, oh, I don't like ghosts, or, you know, and whereas if you don't put it in there and the ghost appears, but they were already liking the book, the ghost will be fine. So it is insane. You know, what's going to appeal to one agent may or may not appeal to another one, probably won't. So you do as much research as you can. If you're lucky and you have writer friends who like their agents, you know, they may say, Margaret McMullen said, you know, use my name, and at least get you a little bit of attention. And then, so say somebody accepts you. If it's you know, you can be really excited if it's a hotshot agent, but guess what that really means? That means they have all these hotshot authors, and all that stuff comes first. Here you are way down there, you know, on the load of stuff on their desk. And so you're not gonna probably get the attention unless they think it's really hot, you know, then you will. But so you have to think about that. And so sometimes the best thing is to find a person who's newer, you know, looking for clients. And a lot of the literary agencies, you'll see the younger agents are assistants to one of the more important agents. That just means that they, you know, they now are good enough that they can accept clients on their own. And that, you know, that could be a good thing because they have the connection with, you know, with the more successful agent. I have had several agents over the years, and the best one I ever had, I was so stupid. I let that, I went away from that agent, and it's been my greatest regret in my writing career that I ever did. It was really stupid. But anyway, I've had several agents, and to me, it's just, they're there in the middle, right? And they're supposed to be doing whatever they're doing for you, but meanwhile, you can't really do anything. You know, you're not really allowed, unless once the book is sold or whatever, then you have the relationship with the editor. But some agents are better at letting you know how, you know, I sent it here, 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 and here. We heard back from these people. And some agents, you know, you feel like you're just out there in the cosmos. And so it's a very tricky relationship. And that's, you know, that's what it takes to have access to that bigger publishing.
I've been racking my brain. I just remember what it was. There's two really good resources for finding publishers, editors, agents, and everything. One is predatorsandeditors.com. Although I know several years ago they were looking for someone to take over the site, so I don't know if it's been updated. So another good one is Writer Beware by Victoria Strauss, and she's
Yes, I
really
heard
good
that.
at keeping you in the know about who to avoid.
Yeah, Poets and Writers has they don't have, I don't think they have agents, but they have independent presses.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you can look those up and you know, they'll take you to the website, see if it looks like something, you know, where your work might fit. And there are a lot of sources.
What's the time frame or something from the point?
Forever. You know, I mean, here's the thing. Yes, a lot, yes. I mean, if I were to sell a book today, well, okay, say, I'll say if I were to get an agent today, which I don't have right now, and it might take, the least amount of time it would probably take would be 6 months for them to sell that book, right? And so that's 6 months out, and then the publication date is gonna be at least 2 years and maybe 3. I'm really old. I don't have that kind of time, right? I mean, seriously, but I love this little detail. The Brontes took, I forget which, were they Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights or whatever. They delivered them to the publisher in November, and they were in the stores in December. So much for technology. You know, just they have to go through so many.
That's heartbreaking.
I know. And with my first one, it was a year. And that was pretty common for a while. And that, you know, that's not so bad. But yeah, it
There's
takes
a lot of writers.
yeah. I mean, it's
lot of
a
writers.
glut. Everybody's a writer now.
Yeah.
And I was just saying to Laurel, I went to this conference, and I had a grant to go, but it was an expensive conference, and there were a lot of retired people there. You know, a lot of retired people, and I think it's great if you want to do that. I can help you do it. But these were like really wealthy people, and they were coming from really successful careers, like in real estate and law and medicine and whatever. And at some point I had this really wonderful insight, which was all these people think because they were so successful in that first career, why wouldn't they be able to write a best-selling novel? Of course they will, you know, and they have no idea what it takes, you know, how to write a novel, how to think about a novel, how to focus a novel. And it's just like, it's so popular right now, this idea. And I'm all for anybody being a writer. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. It makes you different. It's good for you if you're doing it right, whatever is in here comes to the page and it's not hurting you anymore. Well, not as much, but it's
Work, it's still work.
It's
It's still a
still- it's-
labor of love, but
yeah,
it's still a labor.
yeah, and people are not open to feedback. Yeah,
Also not open to writing it themselves. I have a lot of people that come up to me, oh, I have this great idea for a story, it's gonna be a bestseller. And they start telling me about it, I'm like, good, go home and write it. Oh, I don't wanna write it, you write it.
I know. No thanks.
I can't tell your story.
Exactly.
Isn't that amazing?
I want to.
Yeah, exactly. I know you guys get that a lot in the library, so.
I have enough characters in my head saying, write my story, don't tell them.
I got my own.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anybody else with a?
I had a question about agents. If a writer sends a query to an agent and gets rejected, is it okay to rework a piece and resubmit to that same agent?
Not unless they ask for it.
Okay.
But you can submit to another person in the same agency.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, and then you get into these levels of rejection, right? There's there's the form letter that you get, and then, you might, if you ever get anything that is personal, you should pay attention to that. Because that means they're recognizing you as a good writer, and it's just not something, not working for them, but you can go back to somebody like that, not with the same book, but with something else and say, when I submitted, blah, 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 you said, but then I have gotten these letters. My favorite one started like this: I love this book. Let me say it again. I love this book. And they didn't buy it, this wasn't an agent, this was a publisher, and you just think, okay, how do you think about that as a writer? I mean, that was as complimentary a rejection as you could possibly get.
Ironic.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Yeah.
One of my, there's two of my favorites. Back in the 90s, I had bought the book How to Get Published, and one of them says was to call the publisher to make sure you get the right person. I got this person who was excited when I told her about my story, and so I sent it, and then I got the form letter. Well, then fast forward a couple of years later, the best rejection letter I ever got was from the Wild Rose Press. She took the time to tell me why.
Oh, see, that's huge to get that kind of.
That was huge, because
Yeah, I mean,
I was submitting to the wrong genre.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know what genre I was writing, and she took time to tell me why they rejected it. Wonderful story, but you're not writing this, you're writing this. Okay.
That's huge. And they are not gonna say anything like that. Well, for one thing, it's time consuming, but if they don't have an interest in your writing, they're not gonna say anything complimentary because they don't want to hear back from you. There is one thing you can do though is, you know how writers, almost always fiction writers and all books, a lot of books, they'll do that acknowledgement thing in the back. And a lot of the time, writers will acknowledge their agents and their editors. And so one of the ways, if you really love a book and you feel like that book is in some way related to what you're doing, that would be a good agent to try. Because then you can say, I really loved whatever the book is, and I noted that you were this person's agent. And if you can find some kind of little personal thing that is not fake, to say, I've noticed something about you, maybe you would like this. And manuscript wish list, which I just find, it boggles my mind, but they'll say, I'm looking for the next whatever, this, and this. But the truth is, they don't really know. I mean, they might know that they don't like science fiction or they don't like romance or whatever, but they don't know, they're looking for the next whatever was really popular. But what were they looking for? Well, I mean, look at J.K. Rowling's. How many times did that first book get? A bunch of times rejected. And then now, then they're looking for the new Harry Potter, but something else is out there that's going to capture the imagination, and they don't know what that is, so they can't tell you what they're looking for. So it's all very confusing. I mean, it really helps. I think it really helps to have a writing community. People that it's huge to me. Nobody else gets it. I was in my car one day and I was listening to NPR, and there was some sort of advertisement, and a voice said, nobody knows what it's like to be a writer except another writer. And I thought, damn right. And then I thought, oh, that's me. And it was. It was a clip from an interview. I thought, I was glad I agreed with myself still.
We do sound different when we're recording.
I know,
Yeah.
it was really funny, but it is true, and I think, I work with the Indiana Writer Center, and I think that's the greatest benefit. We do have, great classes, personal and Zoom and whatever, and also, we have this, I don't know what the date is gonna be for 2024, but we have a gathering of writers every year,
Yeah.
which is really fun, and it's a full day. It'll be someplace in Indianapolis, and so we have a keynote speaker and also writers, sessions in poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction. And it's a great way to make connections, and for students too, if you
Yes,
wanna bring, we give a special rate to students if you wanna bring some kids, it's great. So those kinds of, and writers conferences, all that stuff, those are good. Midwest Writers Conference is a good one.
All states still.
Well, no, they've separated from Ball State, so now they're their own thing, their own nonprofit.
Where do they meet?
They're still doing one thing,
Okay.
and they've met recently in
Administrative.
the alumni
Oh,
building, whatever that is, alumni center.
so there is a lot in central Indiana, but even if you're not in central Indiana, really shout out to Indiana Writer Center, and
Yeah.
especially with Zoom. The classes and workshops and connections, they're great. It's a great organization.
Yeah, and we've been having, it's a little bit of a drive for you guys, but we've been having members meetings once a month, so if you're a member, it's for members only, so writers talking about
Yeah.
really good talks, craft talks and stuff. And also if you're a member, you get a discount on classes, which is I think it's like a 20% discount, so it makes it a lot cheaper.
Does anybody have any last questions? We're over a little bit. I want to be respectful of your
Oh,
time
I'm fine.
and yours,
We're
so.
good. As we said, we like to talk.
I just wanted to point out also, there's also another hybrid term out there for indie and self-published. For if
Oh,
you're-
indie.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah, yeah,
published by an independent, if you're
Yeah.
published by a small press, but you also do it yourself.
And there's a whole bunch of awards with those
Yes.
that are starting to mean something.
Yes.
Not yet so much, but like the books from, say, She Writes and this other one that I mentioned, they're winning a lot of those awards. And I don't know if there's a, cash prize or anything, but it's notable. And one thing I heard from a techie person who was helping me with my website, she said that if you have won any award, if you put the, they give you a little medallion or something that you can use, that those books sell better. And it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be the National Book Award, though that would be nice. But they can be the smaller awards as well. So.
That's good.
I will say I have lost twice to Neil Gaiman in the anthology awards, so.
Well, keep at it.
That's not bad.
Okay, but he's delightful. Have you read his?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you get up to that, some people don't even have the opportunity to lose. Because their books aren't mentioned, so. Cool.
Well, I want to thank you again both for coming. It was really great. Go ahead and shut off the recording so you can say anything you want.
Okay,
I was gonna ask, so
Sure.
I think it's funny because I can appreciate what you're saying of people that are retiring or, semi-retired and come to this shop and think they're gonna, this workshop or the seminar, and think they're gonna write a best-selling book. So, without knowing anything about writing. So, I am not an English major, I'm not a writer at the moment. I've always enjoyed writing, like you said, it gets what's in here on the paper. So for someone who is not, let's say, an English major, I'm technology. So which is
Veronica was a,
completely, you think,
biology
well,
Yeah.
what would be your advice? Take, like I said, specific.
what do you want to write?
I would like to write fiction,
Okay.
stories.
Do you want to write short stories as opposed to a novel?
I would love to do a novel, but I've never done one. So I'd probably say start with short stories.
Okay. I will say this. an idea for a novel is different, is just a different nature of ideas than it is for a short story. So you know, think about what your ideas are like. A short story is like this, you know, there's a moment usually. And a novel is more about evolution. And so I find I do not have personally short story ideas. However, the great thing about writing short stories when you're starting out is that you fail faster. In other words, you know, you write them, you can get feedback, and you can learn about craft as you go on. So it doesn't matter what your background is at all. A lot of people have all kinds of backgrounds writing, and it doesn't mean a thing. In fact, I feel like in some ways, the worst thing you can do is be an English major, because you could read all those books anyway. And you don't, and you know, then you have the world, but the world is English, whereas you've got the whole world of IT or whatever, and there are a lot of stories there, right? So don't worry about that.
No.
I would
Be a reader.
be a reader. You
I
read
think
the
you like to read. You can have any academic background or professional
Doesn't matter.
background to be a writer, but if you're not a reader, I don't think it's
you
gonna
probably
be,
won't be very good.
you won't be very successful. That's hands down. And then if you know what you like to read, that's your first teacher.
Yep.
Yes, and I do like to read. And it's funny when you said like James Patterson, because I've actually read books that I'm like, this is awful.
Yeah,
How are
yeah.
they selling millions?
Yeah,
of
I
copies?
know.
Look, this is awful. And I'm not even like I said, an English major. I'm like, wow, you know. But I guess my question is more like, how do I learn that crap?
Okay,
you know?
here are a few things. There are some really good books, and if you email me, I will, it's just barbshoup@gmail. It's easy.
Okay.
If you email me, I will send you a list of some books that will be helpful to you. Some of which are, I mean, I don't much like how to, I kind of like people talking about their writing lives, but there are some good books. So read those books. Here's a fabulous exercise. Choose a short story that you love. And the deeper and more complex, sort of the better. Not heavy duty, I don't mean that, but just choose a short story that you love. And I used to make my students do this, and they hated it, but they always admitted in the end that they learned a lot from doing it. And so you're gonna read that story a second time. So you're gonna read it the first time and just read it. And write and free write, no thinking, just off the top of your head, free write whatever comes into your mind about that story, about reading that story. Read it a second time, but look for something. Like you might look for dialogue, you might look for transitions, you might look for narrative, you might look for description, you know, anything that comes to mind that happens. Now, I know all stories don't have all things, but anyway. So with each reading, you do that first reading if you're looking at dialogue, and you highlight all the dialogue. And if then you do a second reading and you're looking for description, and you highlight that in a different color. And you go through that, and you're going to read it 5 times, looking at something different each time. And then you're going to write at the end, a last writing in which you just think on the page about what you learned about the story, how it works, and you know what that means to you as a writer. The first time I ever did this, it was it was with Edith Wharton's Roman Fever, which I absolutely love that story. And it was just, and this is reading not like an English major, but reading like a writer. Because what you're looking for, I would say to students, what do you feel and where do you feel it? You know, like you're like, where is that on the page, and how does the person do it? You know, what words created that feeling, and what do you know, and where do you know it? You know, where does something, you think, oh, there's something wrong here. Where is that? How does that happen? And when you do that, you learn so much about, a story is like a little machine, you know, it really is. There's something about it that it just works in a certain kind of way. And the way it works has to do with how the person put words on the page. And I also, and that's a great exercise. I've got some other ones I'll send you, but and also read novel idea. Oh, I have another, I don't even think you can get that anymore. I did one that's called Story Matters but I have some interviews, and I'll send you those. I'll stop in just a second, but I just want to say this to you since you're beginning. Here's what I always say about writing. It's like translating. If you think about translating poetry, right? And the poem has a feel and a sound and a shape, and you can never make You can never make the music of a poem the same in two languages, right? Because they don't sound alike. You can't translate sometimes syntax, it doesn't work. There are so many things, cultural things that don't translate. And so as a translator of a poem, you know, there's always gonna be a gap between the poem itself and the poem in the second language. And your job is to make that gap as small as it can be. That's it. Nobody ever gets it right. And so if you think about that in terms of writing, everything that's in your head, everything you know about the story, which is shape, which is characters, images, all that kind of stuff, none of it is in words. For me, dialogue is not in words. It's in some kind of a rhythm, and I have to match up the words. And so what your job is then, you know, you have to be fluent in your own head and in your own heart, and then you have to be fluent in craft. And that's why craft is important, because in a very literal way, you are translating whatever is there to there. And there's always going to be a gap. It's never going to be the same. So if you talk to really, you know, well-known writers who've written fabulous books and you say something about their book, they'll always go, oh, well, you know, because what they're talking about is that gap between what they wanted and what it is. And so if you think about it that way, what criticism is somebody being able to help you see what's not there, you know, because you read what's on the page, and whenever you're reading your own stuff, whatever is up there, it goes right, you know, you're reading it all into it, but it may not be there. Yeah. So like one time my agent said to me, do you mean this character to be totally horrible? And I was like, well, no. And she said, that's not there yet. And so I had to go back and I had to find places in the, you know, in the text where I could add something that would make him more complex. So when you're looking for feedback, that's what you're looking for. Somebody to not to say this is good or wonderful, but what works, and to ask questions and make observations that help you see that gap.
So we're gonna stop because they wanna interview us.
Oh,
but
sorry.
We're gonna go then into the coffee house and have our
Yeah,
lunch. So if
come back
anybody
if you want.
wants to ask informally, thank you all for
Yes,
coming.
thank
This was a
you.
great audience. So if you have
That
more
was fun.
questions.
Thanks. Or, you know, if you have a question later and you want to email me, I'm glad to answer.
Okay.
Hey guys. And-
Also, we are starting a monthly writing group at the Pantheon. You're all invited. If you have books that you've already published, please feel free to bring them and sell them. But it'll be on the first Fridays and everybody will just chat,